sleeping on Deadliest couch. It was horrible. Things were flying off the tables.
The carpet isn't flat anymore. It's a ramp. Cabin doors slam as Anthem of the Seas leans hard. 15, 18, maybe 20 degrees to one side. In the corridors, suitcases roll on their own. People grab railings that suddenly aren't where they expected them to be. Somewhere above, glass explodes with a sharp crack as a wave slams the hull. A deep boom echoing through the steel. On cabin TVs, a quiet blue data screen shows wind speed. 60 knots, 80, spikes over 100. The captain's voice says to stay in your room. This was supposed to be a vacation. For most passengers, the story didn't start with storm charts or pressure readings. It started in a cruise terminal in Bayonne, New Jersey. Families lined up with rolling suitcases and strollers. Retirees compared cabin numbers. Outside the windows, Anthem of the Seas dominated the pier. White, gleaming, stacked with balconies like a floating city. Check-in agents repeated the same line all day. One of Royal Caribbean's newest, most advanced ships. Inside the terminal, screens showed polished footage. The North Star observation capsule rising above calm blue water. People floating in the ripcord skydiving tube. The indoor bumper cars. A ship that made the ocean feel like a theme park backdrop. You walked up the gangway and stepped into a climate-controlled world. Music in the Royal Esplanade. A faint smell of coffee and perfume. No sense at all that this was February on the North Atlantic. Staff made small talk. Where are you from? First cruise? Been to the Bahamas before? When anyone asked about weather, the answers were easygoing. It might be a bit bumpy leaving New Jersey, but the captain would sail around the worst of it. This ship was built for rough seas. And on paper, it was. Anthem carried stabilizer fins, underwater wings meant to counter the roll, azipod propulsion units that could swivel, letting the bridge keep the bow into the waves, high-tech routing software and constant data links to shore. The company called it a smart ship, sold as safer, smoother, more predictable. On the first evening, that pitch matched what people felt. The lights of New York faded. The decks were crowded. Kids splashed in the indoor pools. Couples took photos under the artificial sky in the Esplanade, where it never rained and the temperature never changed. You didn't feel like you were leaving land for something dangerous. You felt like you were entering a sealed environment where someone else had already solved the hard problems. Far to the south, over the Atlantic, the first outlines of a low-pressure system were appearing on NOAA maps. Nobody in the bars or dining rooms could see those. What passengers noticed that first night was simple. A soft, almost pleasant sway under their feet. Glasses on bar counters trembled just enough to be a novelty. Staff called it a bit of motion and passed out seasickness tablets with the ease of people who had seen this 100 times. For many, it felt like reassurance. The ship was really at sea, and this was normal. On shore, the picture looked very different. Forecasters on shore were watching a low near Cape Hatteras deepen faster than usual. Surface charts and computer models showed falling pressure and expanding wind fields. Marine advisories that had started with gales began to discuss possible storm force winds and building seas. Those bulletins fed directly into the data streams used by Royal Caribbean and by Anthem's bridge. The National Transportation Safety Board would later stress that point. Even before the storm reached its peak, publicly available forecasts already hinted at conditions far beyond what most vacation passengers would ever expect to experience. None of that was spelled out on board. Passengers heard soft language instead. Brief announcements that the captain was monitoring the weather, that winter seas could be a little choppy, that this ship was designed for much worse. You might feel some motion tomorrow. It would be fine. Sunday morning, the atmosphere still felt like a normal sea day. Buffets were crowded. Children ran in socks along the corridors. In the solarium, the pool began to slosh higher up the glass walls, but it was more spectacle than threat. Only in details did the tone shift. Crew quietly stacked and lashed deck chairs. Outdoor bars closed early. Doors to open decks were locked with small, polite signs, closed due to weather. On the cabin information channel, the map showed a steady southward track and a wind number that crept from the 20s into the 30s and 40s. Most people had no intuitive sense of what those knots meant. Out at sea, the system was crossing a threshold. Meteorologists call it bombogenesis, when a storm's central pressure drops rapidly and winds intensify around its core. Forecast discussions stopped describing a routine winter gale and began warning of hurricane-force gusts in the strongest sectors. Anthem's reconstructed track shows the ship still broadly heading toward that deepening low. From the perspective of a passenger finishing brunch, it was only a gray, slightly rough day. The horizon looked like brushed metal. Rain bands passed. Walks down the corridor now needed one hand on the rail, and waiters carried plates with a deliberate extra grip. A few guests finally went to the desk with the question that cut through the gentle language. Is this safe? They were told the captain had everything under control, that the ship was built for conditions like these, that this weather would move on. On the bridge, the decisions were less comforting. Barometers kept dropping. Updated model runs pushed higher winds and seas onto the planned route. There was still room to slow or divert, but that meant missed ports, refunds, and a public admission that the itinerary had lost to the weather. The culture, ashore and afloat, trusted design margins and big ship capability. Passengers felt only the physical side of that choice. By early afternoon, the motion sharpened, coffee leapt from cups, and a quiet unease settled in long before anyone said the word storm out loud. The ship stopped feeling playful. You could tell first in your legs. The floor no longer rose and fell in a smooth arc. Anthem would lift under your feet, hang there, then drop away in a sharp stomach-emptying fall. Hallway conversations ended mid-sentence when a sudden lurch sent everyone into the wall. Outside, clouds tore past in fast, low layers. The wind became a continuous roar in the steel, a deep vibration in windows and bulkheads. In the solarium, the pool turned hostile. Water slammed from end to end, climbing the glass partitions and collapsing back as a solid wall. Loose deck chairs hammered into each other and edged toward the railings with every roll. Crew locked the exterior doors, but inside, the change was just as clear. Plates began to slide on buffet counters. Bottles behind bars tapped together in nervous chains. Ceiling panels flexed when an off-angle wave hit the hull. In cabins, the data on the information channel finally meant something you could feel. Wind readings that had been numbers on a blue screen, 60 knots, 70, into the 80s, now matched the way the horizon tilted at impossible angles outside the glass. Drawers crept open on their own and hung there until the next roll slammed them shut. Toiletries marched across bathroom counters. Anything not wedged down ended up on the low side of the room. Then the announcement came. The captain's voice was measured, almost routine, but the instruction was not. All guests were to return to their staterooms and remain there for their own safety. Dining rooms stopped service mid-meal. Elevators jammed with people, then became difficult to use as the car floors angled away from under their feet. In the Royal Esplanade, the storm exposed the ship's weak points. A series of deep rolls sent shoppers grabbing at handrails that were suddenly above or below their hands. Glass storefront panels cracked, then shattered, throwing fragments across the polished deck. Display cases toppled. Chairs slid in slow, unstoppable lines until they hit bulkheads and piled into heaps. Later videos show chandeliers swinging, slot machines rocking, people braced against railings as the carpet itself turned into a ramp. Outside, the instruments recorded what bodies already understood. Wind gusts over 100 knots, more than 115 miles an hour. 30-foot waves burying lower deck windows in a green blur, holding them under before tearing away. In some cabins, the lights went out. In the dark, every metallic groan and distant crash sounded like a warning. Up on the bridge and deep in the machinery spaces, the situation narrowed to a single task: keep the bow into the seas. The Azipod stayed online. Generators held. Officers used every bit of thrust just to hold a survivable heading. They were no longer trying to make progress, only to keep the ship from turning broadside and rolling further. For hours, the pattern repeated. A long climb, a hesitation, a violent drop, an unexpected twist as another swell hit from a new direction. Inside cabins, people lay crosswise on beds, braced against the wall, listening for any sound that might mean the ship had finally tilted too far. On paper, Anthem was still inside its design limits. From those cabins, that claim didn't match what your body was telling you. Sometime toward dawn, the motion changed. The rolls shortened. The crashes sounded a little farther away. Wind on the balcony, for those who opened their doors, felt like a strong, ragged blast instead of a solid wall. When you stepped into the corridor, it looked like after a building fire without the smoke. Room service carts wedged sideways, ceiling panels missing, exposing wiring and ductwork. Strips of carpet bunched where furniture had scraped it into ridges. Crew moved through with trash bags, tools, and tired faces, checking doors, asking if anyone was hurt. Public spaces told the same story. In the Esplanade, sections were roped off where glass had once been. Shops stood half-emptied, shelves reset in a hurry, but scuffs and broken fixtures gave away what had happened. On outside decks, now cautiously opened, pools were drained and ringed with debris lines, like high water marks. Medically, the statistics were better than many passengers expected. There were injuries, cuts from flying glass, sprains and bruises from falls, a smaller number of more serious but non-fatal cases, but no deaths. On the human level, relief mixed with something else: anger. At guest services, people asked one question in different ways. Why were we there at all? Videos were already leaving the ship through patchy internet connections. Clips of listing hallways, shattered spaces, the wind readings in triple digits. As those spread, Royal Caribbean faced a choice. Call this extreme but acceptable rough weather, continue south and try to finish the itinerary, or admit, by its actions, that a line had been crossed. The company turned Anthem around. The cruise was canceled. Everyone received a full refund and a future cruise credit, a financial acknowledgement that whatever the ship's structural limits, thousands of passengers had been taken far beyond what they were ever told to expect. When Anthem came back to New Jersey, the story shifted from raw experience to evidence. Meteorologists on shore pulled the storm apart first. Using archived satellite imagery, buoy readings, ship reports, and surface analyses, they reconstructed how that low near Cape Hatteras had deepened. It met the technical definition of bombogenesis, a rapid drop in central pressure and a sharp ramp-up in winds. But one detail matters for anyone who is on board. The National Transportation Safety Board later wrote that even before the storm hit its peak, publicly available forecasts already showed very dangerous conditions along Anthem's planned track. Gale and storm warnings, growing seas, a rapidly strengthening system. This wasn't an invisible ambush. The NTSB went through routing data, bridge records, and company procedures. Their probable cause statement focused on judgment, the decision to continue on a course that would take a large passenger ship into the path of a rapidly deepening winter storm. They didn't say the ship was unseaworthy. Structurally, it held up. What they questioned was the risk taken with thousands of people who'd been sold a controlled, comfortable experience. Royal Caribbean, under pressure from passengers, media, and regulators, responded in ways you could see and ways you couldn't. Publicly, there were explanations. The storm intensified faster than models predicted, the ship remained safe, the crew performed well. Privately and operationally, policies changed. The company established a dedicated shore-based operations center in Miami focused on severe weather, staffed with meteorologists and maritime experts to support captains in real time. The idea was simple. No master should have to interpret complex, evolving weather data in isolation, with a full ship and a commercial schedule pressing in. For passengers, that might sound like a fix for what they live through, but it also underlines something else. Anthem was marketed as a smart ship, full of sensors, algorithms, and redundant systems. The investigation showed the real limit. All that technology still depends on human choices about what risks are acceptable, what forecasts to believe, and when to say that a profitable itinerary has to yield to the atmosphere. The mystery that remains isn't how strong the storm was, it's why, with so much information available, the lived reality on board still came down to people learning in real time what design limits feel like from the inside. For the people who lay awake that night, listening to the hull groan and the furniture crash, the lesson wasn't abstract. The ocean doesn't care how modern the ship is or how confident the brochure sounds. If you want to see how another can't-fail design met the limits of nature, watch the video on your screen now. And if you're drawn to real stories where engineering, weather, and human judgment collide in ways you can feel from the inside, subscribe to True Mystery Archives and join the discussion in the comments.